Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling a topic that's near and dear to anyone who's ever dreamt of living in the Netherlands, navigating the housing market.
That's right. It can definitely seem like a puzzle at first, especially if you're coming from a different country.
Totally. And to help us crack the code, we're diving into this awesome guide that breaks it all down.
It's a good one. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of what to expect, whether you're thinking about renting or taking the plunge into buying.
So let's imagine our listener right now. They're excited about the prospect of moving to the Netherlands, but that housing question is looming large, right? What should be on their radar?
Well, one of the first things to realize about the Dutch housing market is that it's incredibly diverse. I mean, you've got your iconic canal houses, modern apartments, charming row houses, even those storybook windmills. Okay, maybe not those last ones for everyday living.
Right. But I get your point, lots of variety. And this guide focuses mainly on the more urban areas, right?
Yeah, it seems like most expats, at least initially, tend to land in the bigger cities. Think Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, The Hague, those kinds of places.
Makes sense. Those cities have that international vibe, lots of job opportunities. So if you're picturing yourself settling in a bustling city center, what types of housing are most common?
Apartments, for sure. Especially in those historic city center, space is at a premium. So you'll see a lot of those classic apartment buildings. But hey, don't let that discourage you if you've got your heart set on a house with a yard.
There is hope for us house hunters yet.
Definitely. If you're willing to venture a bit outside the city center into some of the surrounding neighborhoods or even smaller towns, you'll find more of those detached and semi-detached houses.
Okay, so options abound. That's good to know. And what about those who are maybe on a shorter term stay, maybe for work or studies? What are their housing options?
The guide mentions serviced apartments, which can be super convenient, especially if you're not quite ready to commit to a long-term lease. They're usually fully furnished and often include utilities, so it's pretty much hassle-free living.
Move-in ready. That takes the pressure off, especially when you're still finding your footing in a new place.
Exactly. Now, one thing that often pops up when we talk about housing, particularly in the context of affordability, is social housing.
Right, that makes sense. So what's the deal with social housing in the Netherlands? Is that something our listeners should be aware of?
It's good to know about, but it's not usually an option for expats, at least not right off the bat. It's designed to provide affordable housing to Dutch citizens and residents who meet certain income requirements.
So not something our listener needs to factor into their immediate housing search.
Probably not. It's more about understanding the broader housing landscape. The Netherlands has these systems in place to try and make housing accessible, but they have specific eligibility criteria.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's say our listener is ready to dive into the housing hunt, and they're thinking, renting seems like a good place to start. What does this guide highlight about the rental market in the Netherlands?
Well, the guide's pretty upfront about this. The rental market, especially in the popular cities, is competitive, to say the least.
Competitive, how so? Paint us a picture.
Think multiple applications for the same apartment, sometimes within hours of it being listed.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is not a time to sit back and casually browse listings. Our listeners need to be ready to act fast. And what's driving this high demand?
Part of it boils down to a housing shortage that the country's been grappling with.
Okay, housing shortage. That sounds like something we need to unpack a bit. What's the situation there?
Basically, there are simply more people looking for homes, especially in those desirable urban areas, than there are available properties.
Classic supply and demand.
Exactly. And that imbalance inevitably pushes up prices and makes finding a place, whether you're renting or buying, quite a challenge.
So it's a landlord's market, would you say?
In a way, yes. The guide mentions that it's not uncommon for rental properties to receive dozens of applications, sometimes within hours of being listed.
Dozens of applications. Our listeners are probably feeling a little overwhelmed right now. So in this super competitive market, how do you even begin to stand out? What does the guide suggest?
Well, first and foremost, be organized. Having all your ducks in a row is essential.
Okay, so no last-minute scrambling when you find a place you love.
Exactly. The guide emphasizes having all your paperwork ready to go, things like proof of income, employment verification, and get this, even references from previous landlords.
Wait, references for renting. Is that a thing in the Netherlands?
It's becoming increasingly common, especially in those high-demand areas. Landlords want to know they're getting reliable tenants, so having those glowing recommendations can give you an edge.
So it's not just about finding a place you like. It's about selling yourself as the ideal tenant.
Pretty much. It's like a job application, but instead of your skills, you're showcasing your tenant track record.
Love that analogy. Okay, so besides being super organized, any other tips for navigating this fierce rental market?
The guide recommends being open to different neighborhoods. If you're set on living in, say, the Canal Ring in Amsterdam, be prepared for a real battle. But if you're willing to explore areas that are a little off the beaten path, you might be surprised by what you find.
Makes sense. Cast a wider net, explore new areas. You might even fall in love with a neighborhood you never knew existed.
Exactly. And speaking of finding those hidden gems, the guide mentions a resource that can be super helpful. Have you heard of Makelars?
Makelars. Oh, you mean real estate agents?
Yep, that's them.
I thought they were mainly for people buying property, not so much for renting.
That's a common misconception. While they do handle sales, lots of makelars also work with renters, particularly those new to the Netherlands.
Okay, so how does that work? Do you pay the makelar a fee, or does the landlord usually cover that?
Good question. The guide mentions that fees can vary, so it's definitely something to clarify up front. Some makelars might charge a flat fee, others a percentage of your first year's rent.
Got it. So it's an investment, but if it saves you time, stress, and helps you land that perfect place, it could be worth considering.
Totally. Plus, think of it this way. They're the experts. They've got their fingers on the pulse of the market, they know the landlords, and sometimes they even have access to properties before they're publicly listed.
It's like having a housing guru in your corner. They can cut through all the noise and guide you in the right direction. Okay, that's super helpful to know. Now, switching gears a bit, this guide also touches on buying property in the Netherlands. I imagine that comes with a whole other set of considerations.
Oh, absolutely. While it is possible for foreigners, even non-EU citizens, to buy property in the Netherlands, the guide makes it clear that it's not always a walk in the park. There are definitely financial and legal hurdles to consider.
Okay, lay it on us. What are some of the key things our listeners should be aware of if they're thinking about buying?
Well, first and foremost, you're likely going to need a mortgage, which can be tricky depending on your residency status and how long you've been in the country.
So having a solid credit history is crucial.
Absolutely. The guide actually recommends working with a mortgage advisor, especially one who specializes in helping expats. They can navigate the ins and outs of the Dutch mortgage system, which can be pretty different from other countries.
It's all about finding those experts, right?
Yes.
The people who can guide you through the maze. Okay, so mortgages, check. What else is important on the buying front?
Well, the guide doesn't sugarcoat it. Property prices, especially in those highly desirable areas, can be, well, let's just say they're not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, we had a feeling that reality check was coming. Houses in the Netherlands, especially in those popular cities, aren't exactly known for being budget-friendly.
Right. And the guide uses the word competitive to describe the buying market, which, let's be honest, is a bit of an understatement. Bidding wars are not uncommon, particularly for those sought-after properties.
Bidding wars, just hearing those words is enough to make me sweat. So what's the strategy there? Do you need to come in with a crazy high offer right out of the gate to even stand a chance?
That's where having a good make law really comes in handy. They can advise you on what's reasonable for the market and help you come up with a smart bidding strategy.
Okay, so another vote for enlisting expert help. It sounds like a makelar can be invaluable throughout this entire process, whether you're renting or buying.
Absolutely. They're your advocate, your negotiator, your guide through all that paperwork. And speaking of paperwork, there's one more thing the guide highlights that's super important for both renters and buyers: housing permits.
Yes, housing permits. We've mentioned them a few times, but haven't really dived into what they're all about. Give us the rundown. What are they and who needs to worry about them?
Basically, in certain municipalities, particularly those trying to manage housing affordability and availability, you might need a special permit to rent or buy certain properties. It's a way for local governments to regulate the housing market and make sure there are diverse housing options available.
Interesting. So it's not always as simple as finding a place you like and signing on the dotted line. There could be extra steps depending on where you're looking.
Exactly. The guide specifically mentions Amsterdam. Amsterdam has a point system for some rental properties. It's based on things like your income and how big your household is and even how long you've lived in the city.
Wow. So many factors to consider.
Right.
It sounds like, yeah, you really do need to do your research up front. Don't fall head over heels for a place online without checking if you even qualify.
100%. And it kind of goes back to what we were saying before about being open to exploring different neighborhoods. You never know. You might stumble upon some hidden gems in areas you didn't even consider at first.
That's such a good point. It's easy to get fixated on one specific area, but sometimes the best adventures happen when you're willing to branch out.
Exactly. And beyond all the practical stuff, permits and paperwork, there's something else that I think is so important, and the guide touches on it throughout. It's this idea of really immersing yourself in the Dutch way of life.
Ah, I love that. It's not just about finding a house. It's about finding your place in a new culture.
Precisely. And the Dutch, they have such a unique way of life. I mean, think about it. Their love of cycling, that appreciation for coziness. Remember, gezelligheid.
Gezelligheid, how could I forget? It's like the ultimate Dutch vibe. But how does that translate into everyday life in the Netherlands? What should our listener be prepared for?
Well, first things first. Get ready to embrace the bike. It's not just a hobby there, it's their main mode of transportation. You'll see people of all ages zipping around on two wheels from their morning commute to picking up groceries. Don't be shy. Jump on a bike and explore your new surroundings. It's the best way to really get a feel for the Dutch lifestyle.
Okay, sold. And I've heard that the Netherlands is incredibly bike-friendly, like with dedicated bike lanes everywhere.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing. A cyclist's dream come true. And hey, speaking of dreams, wouldn't it be amazing to find a place with a canal view? Just picture yourself there.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. Canal views, bikes, stroopwafels.
Yeah.
It sounds idyllic.
It really can be. But seriously, the point is, finding that perfect place in the Netherlands is about more than just, square footage and fancy appliances. It's about embracing a different rhythm of life, a new culture, a whole different way of experiencing the world.
I love that. It's about finding your gezellig spot, and not just like physically, but in a way that truly resonates with who you are.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the Dutch housing market. We've explored the ins and outs of renting, the world of buying, and of course the importance of immersing yourself in the amazing Dutch culture. What final words of wisdom do you have for our listeners who are about to embark on this exciting journey?
Don't be afraid to just go for it. It might feel a bit daunting, all this new information, but with a little preparation, a dash of adventure, and the right resources, like that trusty guide we've been talking about, finding your perfect spot in the Netherlands is totally within reach. And who knows, you might just find that the journey itself is just as rewarding as the destination.
So well said. Embrace the adventure, everyone. And remember, we're here cheering you on every step of the way. Happy house hunting.